or discussions, comments, and so forth, which will be ably chaired by our comrade Raj Sahai. So with that, you're all here, so obviously Elazar needs no introduction.
Okay, so I just want the order of the meeting. First, I'm going to speak about 45 minutes about two cases. Leo Frank, a Jewish man, lynched, and Mary Turner is a symbol because there was up to 18 people that were lynched, she being the most oppressed, the most horrifyingly tortured, her and her unborn child. So I'm going to first cover the cases quickly, then theoretical analysis. First I'm going to give the background, how I roll with this. Then in the last 10 or 15 minutes, Gerald since the NOI, Nation of Islam, has written an entire book, Volume 3 of their secret relation of Jews and blacks, about the Leo Frank case, supporting his lynching virtually. Gerald is going to talk about their history for the purpose of how to combat NOI type racism from a revolutionary point of view. Okay, so I'm going to begin. In my life, intro is going to be about 4 minutes. I like to be warned of time when my intro time is over. Okay. I went to a religious labor Zionist camp built for some reason in Ku Klux Klan territory in Indiana. Why they did, I don't know. We could not swim on a lake in our camp, so we drove 5 miles to Lake Saginaw. When we arrived there was a very big sign saying no Jews or dogs allowed. I was somewhere between 11 and 13, I don't really remember. I was quite small until I was almost 15. So I went up to a local and I said, sir, usually people that hate us Jews hate blacks even more. How come there's nothing on the sign about them? He said, we don't warn them. There it is, right there. Jews are excluded, blacks are lynched. Okay, I have a further story on that, but I'm going to let it go. Then later, I don't know which came first, whether I had the insight already of the asymmetrical oppression of Jews and blacks from that moment, or later when I read stuff by Morris U. Shappies, who before the Rap Coup Witch Hunt Committee, there were many, not just HUAC, he was imprisoned for perjury because he unfortunately gave a couple names and wouldn't give enough names of communists at NCYU. Okay, so he was chained hand and foot to a black prisoner, and he determined that their oppression was asymmetric, that he was more privileged than the black man, even as they were both manacled together. So I don't know which came first. That's the end of the intro, okay? Now I'm going to recap quickly the Leo Frank case. So on August 26, 1913, was Confederate Memorial Day. It was a Saturday. Most everyone was going somewhere else. Leo Frank was supposed to go to a ball game with his brother-in-law, canceled it for two reasons. Some people say, he says both, that bad weather and I had a production report to do. He was an uptight, meticulous, martinet, punctilious, cold fish, and a nervous twit, and a representative of a sweatshop manufacturing company. We're not going to make excuses for him because he was Jewish, but we're also going to show how a revolutionary would defend, if we had a force there, even a capless from an oppressed national minority. Okay. All right, so then a girl named Mary Fagan, she was murdered on April 26th. Her 14th birthday would have been June 1st had she lived. So she's just shy of 14. And quite beautiful and mature for her age. She picked up her check. The time frame is confusing on this. Supposedly it was between 12:05 and 12:10 that he was supposed to pay her. She got her money, said her job was to insert erasers in the brass tip at the end of pencils. This was the National Pencil Corporation, Jewish owned, and he was a co-owner. A minor co-owner, but he was a co-owner. Okay. that was the end. She was never seen alive after that. He claimed, when she asked, is there more material? Oh, listen, they worked from 55 to 60 hours a week. They employed child labor, mainly girls, but there were also boys. And the conditions in the factory were hideous, filthy, unwashed floors for years. The African Americans could not use the toilets. They had to go in the basement under the elevator shaft and things like that. This is the reality. And any event, he said that no, the material that she was laid off. So not only were they underpaid, not only were they exploited, but they could be laid off. There was no union protecting them at NPC. So now, the problem is, here's what happened. 3 in the morning the next day, Sunday, Newt Lee, a tall, slim black man who was the night watchman, was just there 2 weeks, found the body. It was covered in soot, and at first option it was hard to tell if she was white or black, which is very crucial, unfortunately, for those times. But he looked at her hair and determined the scariest thing a black man could do is find a dead white girl where he's working. But he tried calling Leo Frank 3-something in the morning, no answer. He called the police came down. In the event, there were notes right near the body. And the notes implicated him. It said while he played with me, a tall, slim black man, he's the one that did it himself instead of self. And it was a very poorly written thing. In any event, he was taken into custody. And when they called up Frank 7:30 in the morning. Now this is the manager, the superintendent of the factory. And they come to his house. First of all, who would have let them if I were him, I tell you, you have a warrant? I'm not going anywhere until you they didn't even tell him what happened. They said there was an emergency at the factory. Was there a fire? And he was all nervous, and he went with them, and they took him first to the morgue where Mary Fagan was, and he couldn't even look at the body. He was that type anyway. He was an uptight guy, and he couldn't handle it. But they noticed his nervousness, became very suspicious of him, and I want only 15 minutes on this part, so watch my time, okay?
It's been 5 minutes so far.
5 minutes underway already? Okay. So, in any event, by May 8th, he was indicted. He was brought before the coroner's jury. And Newt Lee was also. Both of them were arrested. Newt Lee was beaten and handcuffed. Leo Frank was not. There's another asymmetric oppression for you. Any event, one of the things that has to be given is the background in Georgia before this case. Any event, he was first found guilty by the coroner's jury, then to a grand jury, by then a guy named Hugh Dorsey, who was the Solicitor General, which we would call a DA today, of one county, Fulton County, which is where Atlanta was. And he had lost a number of cases, and there had been a rash of murders, and the police didn't know what to do about them. Most of them were black women, but nevertheless it was creating a panic in Atlanta. So the grand jury had 5 Jewish members, and he was still indicted, okay? Now, it turns out another black man working there, Jim Connolly, was like a sweeper. He had unfortunately, a criminal record, kind of a roustabout, was always hitting on other employees for money, and he was seen washing what looked like bloodstains out of a shirt. May well have been, too. And he was brought into custody, but Dorsey would not allow him to be indicted by the grand jury. And he gave 4 sets of affidavits. The first one that we should mention is that he said that Frank murdered the girl, and he was a lookout for Frank for solicitation of women for the past few weeks. And he expected her to come, Mary Fagan, In fact, one of the witnesses said that her name was Ferguson. She asked for Mary Fagan's check on Friday because they knew the plant was going to be shut on Saturday. And he said, no, she has to come herself. Well, first of all, that's false. And that's in the book on the Nation of Islam. Another person did the shift, his assistant did the paying. And 2 other girls were with her and denied that she didn't ask for anything. So this occurred all throughout the case. People, the prosecutor in all kinds of slanderous innuendos of every sort. Okay, any event, we're going to go through it quickly because we're not doing the theory at first. The jury, he was indicted, then he had a jury trial. Masses of people were outside. It was very hot, and they had the windows open. There were thousands of people out there, and they became more and more hostile towards the defendant. It got so bad that the day that sentencing was supposed to be taken and the jury to be polled, the judge told his lawyers, Luther Rosser and Reuben Arnold, and others, unfortunately, had too many lawyers really, don't come to court and don't let your client come to court, because if he's acquitted, there's going to be a riot. And the jury heard him talking to the police to get the National Guard ready and all. Any event, it was obvious that the jury was influenced by the crowd. But nevertheless, remember, higher courts of appeal only rule not on evidence, but on improper, one of our lawyers are here, on improper procedures and things like that. And people who know the case of Mamiya, Kevin Cooper, and all the fraudulent stuff that the cops will do could become suspicious here too. Any event, he was found guilty, not in court. By the way, you have no right to, you can't waive your right to be and hear the jury being polled. They have no right to ever, even though Dorsey was smart enough saying that then you can't use this for a basis of appeal if you're not here. Well, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to waive such rights. In any event, it went to the Georgia Supreme Court, district courts. Of the 7 judges on the Georgia District Court, Supreme Court, 2 jurists, Beck and Fish, said when they allowed Connolly to talk about sexual perverse things of Leo Frank, that should not have been admissible, or previous crimes you're not allowed to. In any event, that was, but 5 of them voted tough luck. Then it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Lewis Marshall, who's got fame in other areas, presented his case. If I'm whistling a little bit, sorry. I haven't fully dissolved my bagel. And the Supreme Court ruled against it also, but 2 jurists, Oliver Wendell Holmes and Charles Evan Yu, said a verdict given by a mob terrorized jury is no different than a lynch mob with intent to murder. That became an important thing and saved the lives of some people in 1923, but for Leo Frank it didn't work. Or now the case came back to the prison commission. 2 voted to turn down, and a guy named Thomas Patterson wrote a very nice thing, which I've been looking for, can't find, but he did dissent at the hearings that were held in front of the governor, and he supported Frank's commutation. But the commission turned it down 2-1. Now it came before Governor Slayton, John Marshall Slayton. Now, we're going to try to talk about the forces that impinged on John Marshall Slayton, but let me say this. He knew if he commuted this sentence, that not only was his political career through, he wanted to be senator, would never be governor again and never be senator, but that his life was at risk. And immediately upon commutation, 5,000 armed people came to his estate. He's the first governor in the United States to have called out and declared martial law to protect himself. And they had fire around the crowds and things like that. Then later, a few days later, Nat Harris, the new governor, was coming in, and he was about to get into a car, and a powerful man broke out of the crowd with a 5-foot-long lead pipe and came within a half an inch of killing him when Major Pole Hill Wheeler grabbed him and stopped the killing. So I say, because online he's king of the Jews, they burn him in effigy, he was paid off by the Jews, and all that. That's a lot of crap. First of all, he was well-to-do, and his wife was from the wealthiest family in Georgia. He went to her and said, Sally, if I commute, it's going to be the end of my career, maybe the end of my life. And she said to him, I'd rather be married to an honest, be the victim, the widow of an honest man, than the wife of a coward. Okay. And then in his decision, he talked about the betrayal of Jesus by Pontius Pilate, and he didn't want to have another Jew's blood on his hand, so forth. Now that's his, I believe that he consciously said that, but he was also part of the new bourgeois progressives, the elite. He and Hoke Smith, and their opponents were the populists that became anti-black. They began in solidarity with the black, became anti-black, anti-Catholic, and anti-Jewish. That was the former Governor Joe Mackey Brown and Tom Watson, who C. Van Woodward wrote a very excellent book on, which I have not read. I've only read abstracts of it. And by the way, when Watson died, it was very interesting. This Ku Klux Klan gave a huge floral gift for him, and he got a little one from Eugene Debs from his earlier stuff that he did. So what interests me is the contradictions in people. It comes up over and over. Okay, so then he was, as soon as he signed the commutation order, before the crowds even knew about it, he shipped them up 175 miles away from Atlanta into Milledgeville Prison. Okay? Okay, now the crowd hears about it. Okay, now
3 minutes.
2 minutes left only? Okay. At the prison, another prisoner, William Crean, cut his throat, okay, in the middle of the night. He held him off because he was trying to cut him again, and the screaming brought other people. They dragged William Crean off of him. And fortunately for him, in prison were 2 doctors arrested for attempted murder, the most important of which is a man named McNaughton. He ligated the jugular vein, or he would have died. By that time, the prison doctor, Compton, came. 15 minutes later, he'd have been gone. And everyone said that he saved his life. Okay, he and Davis, the other doctor. So that's amazing, and Crean was tied up. Later, by the way, he was completely pardoned by the unbelievable racist Eugene Talmadge. About 15 years later, Talmadge pardoned Crean, who already was serving for about 5 other murders. Okay, that gives you a clue what's really going on. What I thought of when Crean attacked him, it was like Steve Nelson, the member of the Communist Party, attacked by Yugoslav fascists in prison. It was a put-up job, in my opinion. I can't prove it. Okay, now 3 prisoners died of, this is something I only learned about the last week and a half. 3 prisoners died of typhus up there. Blacks were prison where there was no sanitary condition, there were slop buckets, sewage water was dumped right into aquifers. So he sent up a prison commission up there. I mean, commission to investigate the commission and the warden and the guards, and threatened them that you're going to lose everything. And one of the people that came up was a guy named James Tucker Dorsey, distantly related to the prosecutor. I don't think the prosecutor was stupid enough to be involved in this, my opinion. And it was a reconnoitering job. And Frank even wrote his wife, I met these wonderful people from the prison. They were up there to tell the warden, the guards, and the prison, you want your jobs, you want to continue, we're coming up there to abduct them, and you're not going to stop us. We'll make a show of it. They did. So a few days later, they came up there. These were not the usual lynch crowd. This was the elite, the former governor, Brown, Lucius Clay, heads of their court system, sheriffs. These were professionals, and they were not the masses, like the usual lynch crowd. 1 or 2 leaders and a bunch of pathetic farmers or tenant farmers or whatever. And they took them back 175 miles. Even the distances are disputed online. And hung him in Marietta. And it was not execution by a court, it was a slow strangulation. And he had this cut there, so that aggravated it. And then thousands came, looked at his body, lifted his nightshirt, looked at his genitals, because they'd never seen a circumcised penis. And any event, someone wanted to stamp on him. One of the judges said, we got to ship this body to the undertaker. Guess who had to take his body to the undertaker? 2 African Americans. Imagine going into a lynch mob and getting a body of this guy and bringing it back to the coroner. In any event, that's the end of that case right now. We're going to now go quickly to Mary Turner, because I don't want to... Now, Hugh Dorsey, who successfully framed up, in my opinion, because it's still disputed online, and because of that and the lynching, that was my first thought. I thought, oh, what a brilliant insight. He got him convicted and he was lynched when the governor commuted his order, and now he's governor, and here's these 13 blacks that are lynched while he's in office and he doesn't do a thing about it. I should unite these cases and pick Mary Turner, the most oppressed of all. And the reality is he did nothing about it. He wrote a whole book called The Negro in Georgia, which I have a copy of here. I think listing 145 crimes against the Negro in Georgia. But what did he actually do is the question. And what did he do? He wrote a letter back. Walter White of the NAACP was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, but he was an African American. So he could mingle with the lynch crowd. They sent an entire list of the leaders and the lynch mob that they knew of to Governor Dorsey and to President Woodrow Wilson, our beloved president, who screened the Klansmen, now known as the Birth of Nation, at the White House, recruited for the Klan, may have belonged to the Klan, was an outright racist dog, in my opinion. But in certain other areas, a liberal. People are very, very contradictory. In any event, here's what Hugh Dorsey wrote that I think is definitive. If you blacks would stop the criminal elements of your people from raping, it would go a long way to stopping lynching. This is the governor of the state. This is the United States. In any event, let's talk about what's the matter. Let's talk about Mary Turner. First of all, the whites faced what was called crop lien injustice. That is, they'd have to mortgage their crop to get funding so that they could, what's it, not on?
Oh, sorry, yeah, no, you just keep it close.
I have a pretty loud voice anyway, don't I? Because I'm hard of hearing, so I speak louder than most.
You're right.
All right, so the blacks in Georgia who weren't tenant farmers, and there were some, were caught up in what's called convict leasing peonage. They passed a whole series of, after the betrayal of Reconstruction, they passed a whole series of law for the most trivial things. You could be fined and jailed. And so William Hampton Smith, Hampton Smith was a brutal owner of the old Bryce plantation, and he beat his workers. It's to such a point he couldn't get anyone to work for him. So he would go to the court, pay these fines, and they would be forced to work off their fines. And one of the people, he had a long history with Mary Turner and her husband, Hayes Turner. I can't deal with every one of the 13 or 18. That's another sign of oppression. That there's no picture of Mary Turner. There's hundreds of pictures of Leo Frank. There's debates online of when she was born. I say she was 31. I got that from the Mary Turner Project coordinator, okay, who's been corresponding. So I've been trying to get updated information about this thing. So remember, I'm using her as a symbol, so I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 people only that were lynched. Okay, so one of the people that he got this way, who was just shooting dice, was Sidney Johnson, young man. He beat the crap out of him. One day, Sidney Johnson was sick, and he didn't want to work. He was ill. Hampton Smith beat the crap out of him. So he got a guy. They had a meeting, according to the scholars that the Mary Turner Project sent to me, at the Turner's house, saying, what are we going to do about this guy? He's a slave master, a brutal slave master. peonage slave master, right? Kind of John Brown would have blown away, right? Okay, so Will Head slips into the house of Hampton Smith and his wife, brings out a gun, and 2 days later, Sidney Johnson fires it and kills Hampton and wounds the wife. Now, they claim that she was raped. She was not. But she was hit, but she survived and had a child even. So they talked about her pregnancy, and she was raped even though she was pregnant. And so that revved up a lynch mob of hundreds and hundreds after that. And the first one they caught was Will Head. And he gave information about the others. Can you imagine what it took to get him to give information? Torture, you know. And even they tied a rope around him, let him jump off a tree with the rope, and they rode up, died by jumping with a rope around his neck. And the next one of crucial importance to my presentation is Hayes Turner, Mary Turner's wife. Now, Hayes Turner had objected to Hampton Smith beating his wife and threatened him, and he was on the chain gang. But when he's done with the chain gang, he had to come back and work for Hampton Smith again. So he was caught. Now I'd like to show the slide where he was.
Want to sit down?
Slide 27. He was locked up in a jail, okay, which is unusual. The sheriff, Wade, and Knight, the clerk of the court, took him out of the jail supposedly for safekeeping to Moultrie. And on the road, 3.5 miles away, he was picked up by a mob, masked, taken and lynched, okay? And his body was left all the way till Monday. About 2-3 days of hanging, okay? Oh, his body was left hanging. So that's Hayes Turner, Hazel Hayes Turner, the husband of Mary Turner. Now, Mary Turner, being a grieving wife, complained about the injustice to her husband. But fortunately, before she did that, she hid her children, O.C. and Leicester, L-E-A. Some say Lester, some say Leicester. But she was 8 months pregnant, okay? The crowd came and got her. By the way, the picture on there of the original flyer is wrong. That's the picture of Laura Nelson being lynched, who was lynched by the neck. Mary Turner was hung by her ankles upside down. Gasoline and fuel oil were poured on her clothes. They set fire to it, burned off her clothes while she's screaming. I'm sorry, a lot of this is written by feminists. A lot of what I read. And it's the best analysis by feminists that I read. Remember, her child was separately murdered. If you want me not to say how they obtained the child, let's say the way Nazis did it, or the Ustashi did it. And they separately murdered this infant, okay? Now, Walter White then turned over all the information. Now, the two critical people that were on the lynch mob, A.W. Whipple, was a cotton broker. Now, remember, the whites that were in the crowd were farmers in debt to this guy. He's the one that determined how much they got for their crops. He's the one that had to give them credit. And after a while, someone could never get credit again, and they had to come and work in mills, which is how these poor girls came to work for Leo Frank. And so one thing interesting is in the book, I also corresponded with her. She sent me a copy of her book called The Elegy of Mary Turner. Beautiful book. And it shows drawings of everything I've told you, including the child. And so when Sheriff Wade and Knight took her husband out of prison and met the crowd, she said, wink, wink, you can be sure there was collusion. Just like when Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were released from prison, remember them? That was, the cops were in the Klan and they arranged for the Klan to murder them. Same crap's always been going on. So let's go on with this. Now, that when they got her, before they brought her to the site of her torture, evidence is that they took her by to see her husband hanging there. These fiends, and they called Leo Frank a fiend, but that's what they're not fiends. In any event, Dorsey did nothing about that. And now I want to give the background to, because a lot of people deny the anti-Semitism. So could you show slides 1 through 8? 1 is you could skip, really. It's just the announcement of this thing. The picture on. These are from the populist movement, anti-Semitic tropes and cartoons. When you're seeing those like that, one of the accusations is Leo Frank raped her with his nose. And anti-Semitic. Yes. No anti-Semitism, they say. No. All right, so in 1890, these are from 1896, in Georgia as well as the rest of the South. There was a book called A Tale of Two Nations. Baron Roche sends an agent to the United States to take over and stop free silver and convert it to gold. Baron Roche is Baron Rothschild. It's a trope for it, okay? And then another thing, in the same time that those tropes came out, a man named Sam Hose was lynched, and I must say even more horrifyingly than Mary Turner. The way the Ustashi did to the Serbians. I don't know if you people have read history, what they did, but it was so bad that SS men vomited when they saw it, because they were used to industrial killing, not mutilation. Any event, and it's covered in the splendid book by Ida B. Wells, which I downloaded. It's available online, on lynching. Another man, Strickland, was also lynched. Oh, okay, let's now go to, what's the time? How much time have I got left?
You have done 31 minutes so far.
1 minute for the 45 minutes?
You have spoken 31 minutes so far.
Okay. All right. All right, let's try to do some analysis here. All right, so the Leo Frank case. What it really involves, in my opinion, number one, Dorsey, they say felt he was guilty. I say no. I disagree. I think he trained, Conley was very shrewd, the black men. The jury could not believe, the masses could not believe that a black man could withstand 16 hours of grueling cross-examination by the defense. The defense of Leo Frank was vilely, virulently racist, disgusting, whereas Dorsey used tropes and more clever stuff. He didn't have to. He used Conley. He would never become governor if he convicted Conley of rape or murder. By the way, there's no real evidence of rape, and no one says there were. And what the great scholar Nancy McLean said is that the contest between robbery by, she only had $1.20, but that's enough to buy beer and everything else. The contentious thing between Conley killing her to rob her and Frank to rape her was covering up the anxiety of the loss of power of parents over their children, and that the factories were a place where women, young women, started to have their own sexual agency and weren't under control of their parents. So one of the things that Frank was guilty of, he helped spy on these girls. He would look into the dressing room, not for sexual reasons, or if they were secondary, see if they were shirking, malingering, or flirting with boys downstairs on the street. One of the things that happened is young factory workers who were working class would stone or beat up wealthy guys that came to poach their women. So again, this whole remnant of patrician values was being thrown apart. So here's my view of the commutation of the governor. Two forces were dialectically impinging, contradictory impinging. One is honest, conscious. He studied the case. He noticed that Conley said he defecated in the morning when he went, and that he supposedly took the body down on the elevator. Well, when he went down the elevator, it smashed for the first time the fecal matter. And every time he went down, he tested it, it smashed it. Then what happened is that Leo Frank was supposed to be in his office all the way from 12 to 12:45. And a young girl named Montine Stover came in, said she was supposed to be a defense witness. I was waiting from 12:05 to 12:10. He wasn't there in his office. And he tried to say the safe door blocked her view. Well, the reality is that two coachmen, a coachman and a conductor lived in Bellwood, just outside of Atlanta. she came, Mary Fagan is she I'm talking about, she took the train, caught it about 10 to 12. According to the trainman, she got there 12:10. According to Epps, who supposedly was her boyfriend and rode with her at 12:07, that means she couldn't make a 5-minute walk to the factory. She wouldn't be there at 12:05, or if the coachmen are right, 12:15. So Montine Stover's testimony, according to the governor, is of no merit. By the way, Montine Stover years later was arrested